Hey people, it's the phenomenal STEMist. How are you? Come on and join me as I talk about stage 2 cancer. I said before that I'll be focusing on cancer this month. It's October, and October is the month that we focus on breast cancer. But I want to just talk about cancer in general. So, just to remind you, we talked about this last week. What is cancer? Cancer is uncontrollable, deadly cell growth. And there are different types of cancers. There's carcinomas, and carcinomas are the most common type of cancer. That's basically when your epithelial tissue, your glands, things like your mammary glands in the breast, or the pancreas, or um, the skin, which has a lot of epithelium. The linings of your stomach and colon, they have a lot of epithelium. Any place where there is, when you think about your skin, you constantly shed skin, so your skin has to constantly grow to replace the shed skin. And so any type of cell that likes to constantly grow to either repair or develop, um, that's at high risk of cancer. And so that's what we call carcinomas. Sarcomas are not as um, is less risky. You find that in your connective tissue and um, bones and fat. They don't divide as much. So, but when they do get out of control, that's very dangerous. And then, of course, our developing cells that are developing, they're called blastomas. Um, they're growing and they're developing, so they're at risk of becoming tumors when you're just uncontrollably growing. So, um, that's what cancer is. Cells that are at risk of growing uncontrollably because they naturally just grow. And so we're talking about stage 2 breast cancer, and not breast cancer in general, just stage 2 cancer. And just to remind you, there's a difference between malignant and benign tumors. Okay, so tumors are just cells that grow uncontrollably. They change, they don't look like the normal cell anymore, and they start to grow too much. Um, Moles, there's certain types of birthmarks that they're basically tumors, but they're benign because they don't get to the point where they leave the actual tissue. So you get malignant based on the cells that change have the ability or the desire to leave from where you are. So, for instance, if you have breast cancer, is because your breast cells have grown to a point where they've left the breast and they're growing in your liver. And of course, your liver can't function properly if it has breast cells growing in it, right? So the tendency for cells to leave is the danger. And so many doctors, what they do is they look at for different signs of the cell's ability to grow to the point that they want to leave. And if they grow to the point that they want to leave, they start moving towards areas that are actually going to jump out of the natural tissue. That tells the doctor that it's a malignant tumor. And there are different stages. So stage two is basically it's grown to a point. So this is stage 1 and this is stage 2. It's grown more. All right. So there's even something called stage 0, but we focused on one last week where they just start to grow uncontrollably. And then they grow some more. And now they're getting towards lymph nodes. So they're thinking about leaving. They haven't left yet. Stage 2, they haven't left yet, but they're near the lymph nodes. The lymph nodes are it's a little different than the circulatory system, but Um, they do involve blood vessels, not blood vessels, but vessels that lymph travels through. I'm not going to get into details of that, but the point is it's a traveling area. And you don't want the cells that have been growing uncontrollably to get up and go anywhere. But it looks like they're moving towards that. And so it's a little bit more dangerous than stage one. Stage one, they were just growing. Stage two, they're growing more and they're moving towards the lymph nodes. They're looking to leave. That's dangerous. So scientists, and physicians, they study these cancers and they want to stop the growth. Now, what makes a cell grow uncontrollably? All right. Well, naturally, our cells divide for three reasons: growth, development, and repair. So if I, cut my skin, my epithelial tissue will start to replace it, repair it. So the cells start to grow and divide and make more. I see a couple people watching me, but I haven't seen you, say hi. Um, just hit a like button, a hi, a share. Anyway, so when the cells start to grow uncontrollably, excuse me, they're not growing uncontrollably. When they're trying to repair something, it basically starts to grow and replace something that has been damaged. Or a baby that's developing in the womb, the cells are dividing and dividing and dividing, making more cells to create that baby, right? Or when we're growing, just naturally we're growing and getting taller, our bone cells divide, and different types of our tissues in our body have cells that divide multiple times to basically, replace, or not replace, but make more. Because you need more cells to make a larger person. And so what triggers that? So hormones trigger that. Hormones. You ever seen a young boy when he's in puberty, he gets a blast of testosterone in his body, and he jumps his height. He gets taller and bigger because his cells were triggered. So you see this circle here. It's basically a growth factor. So growth factors and hormones, what they do is they bind to all the cells of the body and trigger through a cascade of events the cell to divide. How does it do that? I'm not going to get into the details of it. I'm just saying there's a receptor on every cell in our body, and they respond to growth factors. And those cells, when they bind to growth factors and hormones, it will trigger the cell to make two, to go from 1 to 2 cells, and from 2 to 4 cells. Well, there's different enzymes that lead to the control center in the cell. It's called the nucleus. That causes the DNA in our body, in our cells, to duplicate, right? And so the DNA now, there's 2 sets of DNA now in the cell. So now you can actually make a whole new cell with new DNA. And that's how our cells grow. They grow by cell division, where they separate, they double the DNA, and then they separate the DNA into 2 brand new cells. Well, something told that to happen. You call that DNA replication. That's basically doubling your DNA so that you can have enough DNA for your cell and another cell that you're creating. I hope that's making sense. Well, then how do we stop this? Because sometimes, because of many different reasons, chaos with these enzymes or overproduction of hormones and growth factors, who knows, genetic factors, the cell is somehow dividing uncontrollably. So what the scientists have done is they've said, okay, let's block these steps. Let's block step 1, let's block step 2, let's block step 3, let's block step 4. So I'm going to talk about the different therapies. When you hear people saying I'm on chemotherapy, they're basically saying I want to stop the cells from growing. If they have stage 2 cancer, they're going to take chemotherapy to stop these cells from growing. I told you, they're growing uncontrollably. They're getting real big and they're about to leave. And you want to stop these cells from leaving into the lymph nodes and into the bloodstream. So you have to quickly get rid of the cells and stop them from dividing. So what do? You have a drug. You've heard of the drug tamoxifen. Tamoxifen blocks the receptor. So there's some hormones that bind to a receptor that move into the nucleus to start replication that leads to cell division and basically uncontrollable cell growth. Well, if I give you a drug that blocks this, then this won't happen, this won't happen, this won't happen, and you won't have cell division. The cells will stop dividing. If you, there's other drugs that inhibit the enzymes that lead to DNA replication. And if you don't, there's some drugs like alkylating agents that jump onto the DNA and stop the DNA from replicating. And if you don't have enough DNA, you can't have the division. You see what this is what we call chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is basically creating chemicals that block the steps to cell division, where one cell becomes two and two cells become four. If I can stop the DNA from replicating using a drug, then I'll stop cell division. If I'll stop the enzyme that controls the steps to replication, then I'll stop cell division. If I stop the receptor from working, then I'll stop cell division. If I give a drug that blocks the receptor and stops the hormone from binding to the growth factor, then I'll stop cell division. So scientists are coming up with multiple steps in the cell dividing part to kill uncontrollably dividing cells. So they'll stop stage 2 in the track where they haven't left yet. So stage 1 and stage 2 is actually the safest form of cancer because they're growing a lot, but they haven't jumped out of the area where they started growing a lot. So what scientists will do is, and doctors will give is, they'll give these drugs to kill it stop them from dividing now any further. Of course, they'll try to shrink the tumor. That's what they're saying. They'll make them die, or they'll try to remove it. You ever see people with chemotherapy lose their hair? They lose their hair because your normal cells have these receptors that make your hair grow. And so if you're taking drugs to stop the cells from dividing in your scalp, then your hair will fall out. Our highly dividing cells that is our scalp. Our scalp cells divide all the time, just like our skin cells. And so you give a drug that stops dividing cells that are uncontrollable, you'll stop regular cells from dividing. Okay? So I only wanted to talk to you about stage 2 cancer. And that's what I did. Thank you so much for joining. I see 2 of you, but you haven't greeted me. Who are you? Tell me who you are. And let me know if you have any questions. I'll wait a couple of seconds to see if you have any questions. Tell me who you are. Oops. And let me know if you... Oops, sorry. All right. I hope I've made clear what stage 2 cancer is. Next week, we're going to talk about stage 3, and that's when we get into trouble. Stage 3 and 4 are very dangerous. Stage 1 and 2, they're growing, but they're staying put. And so we'll give you drugs to stop you from growing. Stage 3 and 4, they're starting to leave. All right. Watch those hormonal therapies, ladies, those of you who are in menopause. Because what you're doing is, or premenopause especially, is you're adding too many hormones that will put you at risk put you at risk of triggering too much cell division. Hi. Hi, Marcia. Thanks for joining. I hope I was clear on what cancer is. See you guys next week. I am the phenomenal STEMist. Good night.